All right then, so I've just got back from my first ever proper like international gravel cycling adventure, and I thought I'd talk you through the setup that I used on my bike, because there are some things that really didn't work well that I will absolutely change for next time, but also some things that did work well that I would use again next time. So hopefully this helps you if you're planning your setup for your next gravel cycling adventure. Now, as you can see, this bike is, I've literally just taken it out of the travel box before I've washed it and packed it away, so what better time than whilst my memory is fresh. Let me start off by talking about tech. So what did I use on this bike electronically that worked well or didn't work well? Bike computer wise, I used a Garmin 1040 Solar. They're pretty much the gold standard, aren't they? Garmin's really in the bike computer market, in my opinion. The battery lasted for ages. I didn't actually charge it while I was away. We didn't get the whole route planned, more on that in another video I'm sure, but I'd probably ridden for about 25 hours and I had about half the battery remaining, so that really wasn't a problem at all. The only thing that didn't work well on it is I'm having like an intermittent issue with it, where on the routing it shows track up, sorry, it shows north up rather than track up. So when you're going forward, if you're not going north, it doesn't show as forward on the computer. It's hit and miss as to whether it works or not. I go through the settings and change it. It's just a fault that I think comes across. I'm going to raise a ticket with Garmin actually, but that was annoying on one of the days to have that. I didn't want to stop and start my route. I was already a few miles in when I noticed. ETAP, now the gears are electric. Now, there's only one battery on this, on the group set itself, because there's only one shifter. It's a one by, and I charged it before I'd gone, and I did think, perhaps naively, that I wouldn't need to charge it whilst I was there. I've never really tracked how many hours these things worked for, but I'd always worked under the assumption that, well, even if you're riding every day, it's going to last a couple of weeks. On day 3, the battery died on the rear mech, and I was surprised at that. It is possible that a shifter's been pressed in transit or something, but the battery was still green when I got there. Now, luckily, I had packed a spare battery, so I just swapped it, and I did also have a charger for if a battery had, really drained its battery. But yeah, swapped it and sorted it, no problem. But it was just a bit strange that went so early. Lights, I had a little button light on my rear bag, which I had here, which is in the wash, and I had a handlebar bag on the front here that, in addition to these two that you can see here. Now, the front light worked really well. I had on top of the handlebar bag, and it was a big Lazine light. It was probably excessive for what I needed. The battery would last hours and hours, but we didn't really know how long we were going to be out for into the darkness. I wanted to be over prepared, and that really worked well fine. Just touched on bags. What happened with bags? I've got an Apogura frame bag and top tube bag that I just bought with the bike when I bought them. It's like the Apogura X Canyon range, which basically means they're probably just more expensive, but they're premium bike bags. They're waterproof, dustproof. They worked really well. This I just used for food on the day. There's probably still some, there we go, still some sweets in there, nice one. And my frame bag I just used for during the day stuff, so tech, a couple of random bits in there, battery pack, those sorts of things. And I had most of my stuff in a saddle bag and bar bag. The problem I did have is that I had too much weight in my saddle bag, and whenever I got out of the saddle, the bag would move around. It just feel like the back end's swishing around because you've got this weight moving around. On day 2, I moved a lot of that stuff into the handlebar bag, and it just rode so much better. So I tend to just keep like my flip-flops and an inner tube in my saddle bag after that and put most stuff on the front. So going into it, I thought it'd be the other way around, but actually it was a lot easier to ride with the weight on the front. Some other things, right, tyres, wheels, valves, those sorts of things. Now, I'd recently put these tyres on. These are Schwalbe Thunderbirds in 2.1 inch, and they worked really well, especially on sandy sections. Dan, who I was riding with, had narrower tyres, and it wasn't like night and day difference, but there were definitely some sections that I was finding easier than he was, purely just down to the tyre volume. I think that the tread pattern worked well in that there's quite a lot of good gravel and road, and these roll pretty fast. And then there was also some rougher stuff which they seemed to handle really well. I ran about 25 psi on the tyres, and that was pretty much perfect, to be honest. The downside was that I did buy some high volume valves for these wheels a couple of weeks ago, because I've been using silica sealant, which does block valves up really easily. They're 76 Projects high flow valves. I really like 76 Projects. I buy all their other stuff like computer mounts and stuff, and I just bought the valves. I didn't really pay too much attention to the order page. Turns out you need a little adapter to be able to screw on a pump onto it, especially hand pumps, to be able to pump the tyres up. So when I got to Lanzarote, I used the little electric pump which didn't need that, and then I left it in my bike box, and then the next day I thought, oh, I let a bit of pressure out, and I thought, I'll let a bit too much out, I'll top it back up again. big problem. Really struggled putting any pressure in. I had to get a latex glove and wrap it around the thread on the valve so I could then get a pump on it and just get some pressure in. I didn't quite get enough in it, as much as I wanted in, but it was better than nothing. Completely my fault. I should have read the page a bit more. It does explain that you might need one of these adapters, which I now have since bought, but it was just a problem I had, and perhaps if other people aren't reading the pages as thoroughly, then they'll come across the same thing. Cassette and gearing. Yes, I could have done with another gear. I've got a 40 tooth crank and a 44 cassette. I think you can always feel like you need one more gear though. Like if I had another gear, I'd have probably still thought I wanted another gear. So I don't actually really strongly believe I needed another gear. I was riding like 3 miles an hour when I was grinding, so any slower than that and I might as well be walking. But yeah, I didn't want to go to the trouble of changing my crank for this ride. 44 is the biggest capacity that mech can take, so it was okay. But yeah, in an ideal world, I'd liked another gear. When traveling, I've noticed that these Zip 303S wheels, the cassette and freehub just falls off. I don't know whether there's something wrong with these or whether they just fall off, but they essentially just fall out. Now, it's not a problem because you can just refit it after travel, but I did lose one of the pawls on the freehub when I got there. I found it luckily, but on the way home, I've now lost another one and can't find it, so I'm going to have to order another one. Could be a bit of a problem if you were to lose two and only have 1 point of engagement on the freehub. Maybe two still a problem, but you know, I found all three and used them thankfully. Brakes themselves, absolutely fine, worked really well. They were really working hard as well, stopping me going down some hills. I do looking at the pads now, they do look quite low, so in hindsight I will in future take some spare brake pads because I wouldn't have once thought about how these had lasted another 3 or 4 days. Up to the cockpit, I know you're probably thinking, why have you got aero bars on? And to be honest, I did think that some days as well. There were some days where I didn't use them at all, but you know, for those sections where we were perhaps on the road or into a strong headwind, I was able to get onto the bars and it just gave me another position to ride in when we were riding for, you know, 8 or 9 hours in a day. I've also got extra shifters on the end of extension, so in case these break, I've still got some other shifters. Now, they were a bit of a problem because when you're climbing for an hour or two at a time, I do like climbing on the tops, so here, but of course I can't put my hands on there because of the armrests. So I was climbing at times with my hands on the armrest, and it just wasn't ideal. It didn't feel like obviously riding a normal bike, and it's not how I'm used to riding like a road bike up hills. So upsides and downsides to the aero bars. I do think that there was still a benefit, but I'm not sure I'd like break my neck to actually really like go to the effort of taking them with me, because I have to take them off to get in the bike box and so on. So maybe I'll review that in future. Just back to the drivetrain, because my list is in some sort of random order. The actual maintenance of the drivetrain was really easy, so I just took a few baby wipes with me, and at the end of the day I would wipe the chain with the baby wipe, and then I'd put some NRG wax lube on the chain. NRG are a partner of this channel, but I would, even if I wasn't partnered with them, I would use wax lube. I didn't go with a fully waxed chain, and I could have perhaps done, and it would have got me through a day or two, but just knowing that I was wiping it clean and wiping all the muck off it for the day, and then reapplying wax lube, and then starting every day, I had a pretty much as new drivetrain. That was really good, and it wasn't making any noise by the end of each day, so it could have perhaps gone for longer, but it was just one of those like daily tasks that I did just to make sure that my bike was tip-top. Other things that sort of went wrong, I did have a bit of a saddle squeak. I don't know if I can replicate it here now. Of course no, it's not going to work. It's either the saddle or it's this Canyon split seat post that might need tightening up at the bottom. When I said, oh, I think it's my saddle squeaking, Dan, who was with me, who's a bike fitter, said, oh, is it and he said, is it a physique? So that to me says that he's had some squeaking saddles before. He obviously sees a lot of bikes and a lot of saddles, but I would like to just test the seat post split, you know, tightening that up at the bottom first before really just saying it was the saddle. The saddle itself worked really well. I'm used to it, and it's a gravel saddle with the hole filled in, so yeah, it worked really well. Other than that, I didn't have any sort of mechanical issues with the bike. It worked really well. There weren't really any more like creaks and squeaks other than the saddle or seat post, and yeah, I think this is absolutely the right sort of tool for the job. I do really think that these big tyres make a massive difference to being able to ride off-road and ride for hours and hours and on tough terrain. I wouldn't want to go back down to like 40s or 45s. I think these are 2.1 inch, and that's probably the smallest I'd like to use. Just looking at the bike now as well, the rear tyre does look to have worn quite a lot more than the front. Obviously there's a lot of weight on the bike, me and the kit, and there were quite a few long road sections. Those knobbles in the middle are definitely a bit lower than the one on the front, so interesting to see how much wear that's taken in the time being. Right, let me know your thoughts and comments down below. Would you have done anything differently? I'm going to eat these sweets, I'm going to wash the bike, and I will see you again tomorrow at 1 o'clock. I knew I'd forget something. The bottle setup worked really well. I only lost one bottle off the forks one day when I hit a massive bump and it ejected. Worked well for me to swap it around. I could reach them all from on the bike. Didn't need a bladder or anything on me. 4 bottles on the bike was perfect.